Marcus Chen had always thought his job as a maintenance worker on the orbital station Epsilon 7 was the most boring position in the galaxy. Every day, he crawled through cramped ventilation shafts, replaced burned-out circuits, and cleaned the endless filters that kept the station's air breathable. The other species working on the station barely acknowledged his existence. To them, humans were just another worker race, unremarkable and easily replaceable. The Galactic Council had been clear about humanity's place in the cosmic order when first contact happened 50 years ago. Humans were classified as a Class C species, suitable for manual labor and basic maintenance tasks. The Zephyrians with their crystalline minds handled complex calculations. The Vortani with their multiple arms managed intricate assembly work. The gas-breathing Nelthars controlled atmospheric systems with their natural understanding of chemical processes. Humans, they fixed things when they broke. Marcus didn't mind the work itself. There was something satisfying about taking a broken system and making it function again. What bothered him was the constant dismissal from other species. Just that morning, a Zephyrian engineer had walked past him without even a glance, discussing primitive human methodology with his colleague as if Marcus wasn't there. The orbital station served as a crucial hub for the Outer Rim territories, processing raw materials from asteroid mining operations and shipping them to core worlds. Thousands of beings from dozens of species worked there, creating a complex ecosystem of interstellar commerce. The station's AI systems, designed by the Advanced Ethereal Collective, managed most operations with cold efficiency. On this particular day, Marcus was deep in maintenance shaft C-47 when the first alarm sounded. The station's lights flickered from white to amber, indicating a minor system irregularity. Nothing unusual there, but then came the second alarm, followed by a third. The lights shifted to red, and emergency klaxons began wailing throughout the station. Marcus quickly made his way to the nearest communication panel. The station's AI spoke in its emotionless tone. "Attention all personnel. Unknown vessels approaching station perimeter. Defensive systems activating." Through the small viewport in the maintenance shaft, Marcus could see sleek, dark ships emerging from what looked like tears in space itself. They moved unlike anything he had ever seen, flowing rather than flying through the void. The station's defensive turrets came online, firing bright blue energy beams at the approaching vessels. But something was wrong. The beams seemed to bend around the dark ships, deflecting harmlessly into space. The unknown attackers returned fire with weapons that didn't flash or streak like normal energy weapons. Instead, sections of the station simply stopped existing, leaving perfectly smooth holes where metal and machinery had been moments before. Panic spread through the station like wildfire. The advanced species, so confident in their technological superiority, found their weapons useless against this new threat. The Zephyrians' quantum computers couldn't calculate effective targeting solutions. The Vortani assembly systems couldn't adapt quickly enough to modify weapons. The Nelthar's atmospheric controls meant nothing in the vacuum of space where the battle raged. Marcus watched through the viewport as one of the dark ships approached the station's main docking bay. It didn't dock in any conventional sense. Instead, the ship seemed to merge with the station's hull, creating an opening where none had existed before. Emergency bulkheads slammed shut, but even those began to dissolve as strange figures emerged from the vessel. The beings that boarded the station defied easy description. They seemed to shift between solid and liquid states, their forms constantly changing. Traditional sensors couldn't lock onto them, and energy weapons passed through them as if they were made of shadow. Station security, primarily composed of heavily armed Vortani guards, found themselves completely helpless against an enemy they couldn't properly target or understand. Communication systems throughout the station began failing one by one. The sophisticated quantum networks that connected different sections simply stopped functioning. The AI's voice became increasingly distorted before cutting out entirely. In the growing chaos, the various species began abandoning their posts, seeking escape pods or personal vessels to flee the station. Marcus found himself trapped in the maintenance section as emergency protocols sealed off his area. The environmental systems were failing, and he could hear the distant sounds of whatever was happening in the main sections of the station. But something strange occurred to him as he sat in the cramped, dark maintenance shaft. While all the advanced technology around him was failing, his simple tools still worked perfectly. His mechanical wrench still turned bolts, His basic multimeter still detected electrical current. His flashlight, powered by simple chemical batteries, still provided light when the sophisticated illumination systems failed. It was as if whatever was attacking the station only affected advanced technology, leaving primitive tools untouched. Through the station's failing communication system, Marcus caught fragments of emergency broadcasts. Other stations throughout the sector were under attack by the same mysterious forces. The most advanced defensive systems in the galaxy were proving useless against these shadow-like invaders. Fleets commanded by the greatest military minds of multiple species were being systematically destroyed. As Marcus listened to the chaos around him, he began to realize something that chilled him to his core. The attackers weren't just destroying technology randomly. They were being systematic, methodical. They were targeting anything that relied on quantum processing, advanced AI systems, or exotic energy sources. All the technologies that made the galaxy's advanced civilizations possible were being neutralized. But they were ignoring anything that operated on basic physical principles. Simple mechanical systems, chemical reactions, and basic electrical circuits remained unaffected. All the technologies that these advanced species had dismissed as primitive were the only things still functioning. Marcus gripped his simple tools tighter and made a decision that would change everything. While the galaxy's greatest minds fled in terror from an enemy they couldn't understand or fight, he was going to do what humans had always done best. He was going to figure out how to fix this problem, using nothing but determination, creativity, and the kind of stubborn ingenuity that had carried humanity from cave dwellers to starfarers. The war for the galaxy's survival was about to begin, and it would be fought not with the most advanced weapons, but with the most basic tools imaginable. Sarah Martinez had been working the night shift at the agricultural processing facility on New Eden when the attacks began. As a quality control inspector, she spent her days testing soil samples and checking crop yields using basic chemical analysis equipment. Her colleagues from other species often joked that human, analytical methods were hopelessly outdated compared to their quantum scanners and molecular sensors. The facility supplied food to 17 different worlds in the sector, processing everything from Terran wheat to exotic alien fruits that required careful handling. Sarah's job was considered entry-level by galactic standards, something any primitive species could handle. The real important work, according to everyone else, was done by the Zephyrian, computational systems that optimized growing conditions, and the Vortani automated harvesters that could process crops at incredible speeds. When the emergency broadcasts started coming through, Sarah was in the middle of running pH tests on soil samples from the outer fields. The first reports seemed impossible. Entire fleets were going dark across multiple sectors. Advanced civilizations that had dominated space for millennia were suddenly losing contact with their colonies and starships. The descriptions of the attackers made no sense. Shadow beings that could phase through matter and weapons that erased things from existence. But as the reports continued, a pattern began to emerge that made Sarah's blood run cold. Every technology failure described in the broadcasts involved systems that relied on quantum processing, exotic matter manipulation, or advanced AI networks. The galaxy's most sophisticated technologies were being systematically neutralized, leaving entire civilizations helpless. Sarah looked around the processing facility with new eyes. While the Zephyrian computers that managed crop rotation had gone silent, and the Vortani harvesting machines had shut down completely, her simple chemical testing equipment continued to function perfectly. Her pH meter, her basic microscope, her manual centrifuge, all of them operated on principles that were thousands of years old by galactic standards. The facility's communication system crackled with increasingly desperate messages. The planetary defense grid, controlled by advanced AI systems, had gone offline. The orbital platforms that protected New Eden were drifting powerless in space. Emergency services were failing as their sophisticated coordination networks collapsed. But the old emergency radio frequencies, using simple amplitude modulation, were still carrying signals. Sarah tuned her portable radio to the emergency bands and heard something that changed everything. A human voice broadcasting from the mining colony on Kepler 442b was reporting that their basic mining equipment was still operational. Another transmission came from a freight hauler pilot, human, saying that his ship's backup mechanical systems were allowing him to maintain basic navigation, even though his main computers were dead. Across the galaxy, it seemed that humans were the only ones whose technology was still functioning, precisely because it was the technology that everyone else had dismissed as primitive and worthless. The facility's main doors burst open, and a group of panicked Zephyrians rushed inside. Their crystalline features, normally perfectly ordered and geometrical, showed signs of distress that Sarah had never seen before. Behind them came several Vortani, their multiple arms twitching in agitation, and a cluster of Nelthars whose gas exchange membranes were fluttering wildly. "The communication arrays are down," announced Veltar, the Zephyrian facility supervisor. "Our quantum networks cannot establish connections with off-world systems. The automated defense systems have ceased to function. We require immediate evacuation to core worlds where better protection may be available." Sarah stood up from her workstation, holding her simple radio. "I'm getting communications on the emergency frequencies. Human colonies are reporting that basic technology is still working. Maybe we don't need to evacuate. Maybe we need to start thinking about how to fight back." The assembled aliens looked at her with expressions ranging from confusion to dismissal. Corthes, a Vortani engineer, spoke with his usual condescension. "Human, your primitive communication devices are irrelevant to the current crisis. We require access to quantum encrypted channels and advanced tactical systems to coordinate an effective response." "But those systems aren't working," Sarah pointed out. "The only things that are working are the basic technologies that humans use. Don't you think that might be important?" The argument was interrupted by a new sound from outside the facility. It was unlike anything Sarah had ever heard, a low humming that seemed to vibrate through her bones rather than her ears. Through the facility's windows she could see dark shapes moving across the sky, flowing like liquid shadow against the stars. The attackers had found New Eden. The advanced security systems that protected the agricultural complex immediately activated, sending streams of coherent energy into the sky. But just like the reports from other worlds, the weapons seemed to have no effect on the approaching shadows. The energy beams passed through them or bent around them, accomplishing nothing except to reveal the location of the defensive installations. Within minutes, the security systems began to fail. Not in explosions or dramatic collapses, but simply by ceasing to exist. Sarah watched in horror as sections of defensive towers just vanished, leaving smooth gaps where complex machinery had been moments before. The facility's emergency systems triggered lockdown protocols, sealing blast doors and activating internal defenses, but those systems, like everything else based on advanced technology, began failing almost immediately. The blast doors froze halfway closed. The internal sensor network went dark. Emergency lighting flickered and died. Sarah grabbed her emergency kit, a collection of basic tools and supplies that she had always carried despite the ridicule from her colleagues. In the growing darkness, her simple chemical light sticks provided illumination when nothing else would work. Her manual compass gave her direction when the facility's navigation systems failed. Her basic first aid supplies remained effective when the automated medical systems shut down. The other beings in the facility were beginning to panic as their technological advantages stripped away one by one. The Zephyrians' mental calculations, enhanced by quantum implants, became sluggish and confused as their augmentations failed. The Vortani's coordinated movements became clumsy without their networked communication systems. The Nelthars struggled to process environmental data without their sophisticated atmospheric sensors, but Sarah found that her human abilities were unaffected. Her natural senses worked perfectly. Her ability to solve problems through intuition and experience remained intact. Her capacity for creative thinking under pressure actually seemed enhanced by the absence of technological aids. As the shadow attackers began entering the facility through walls and sealed doors, Sarah made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. Instead of running or hiding like the other species, she began to fight back using the only weapons that still worked: human ingenuity, basic chemistry, and the kind of stubborn determination that had carried her species through countless challenges. She mixed cleaning chemicals from the facility's supply closet, creating crude but effective smokescreens and irritants. She rigged simple explosive devices using fertilizer and basic detonators. She used mirrors and focused light to create confusion among enemies that seemed to exist partially outside normal space. Most importantly, she began broadcasting instructions on the simple radio frequencies, teaching other humans across the galaxy how to fight an enemy that couldn't be defeated with advanced weapons. but might be vulnerable to the primitive technologies that everyone had forgotten. Could be weapons of war. David Kim had spent 15 years as a cargo hauler, moving freight between the outer colonies in ships that other species considered outdated relics. His vessel, the Iron Mule, was built using human engineering principles that emphasized mechanical reliability over technological sophistication. While alien ships relied on quantum drives and AI navigation systems, David's ship used chemical rockets, mechanical gyroscopes, and manual controls that required actual skill to operate. The galactic shipping companies tolerated human freight haulers because they were cheap and reliable, not because they were respected. David's cargo runs were typically the boring jobs that nobody else wanted, moving raw materials to frontier worlds, delivering spare parts to remote mining operations, or hauling agricultural supplies to colonies that couldn't afford faster transport. When the attacks began, David was 3 days out from the Proxima Centauri system, carrying a load of basic manufacturing equipment to a new colony. His ship's communication array picked up the first emergency broadcasts. But like most humans, he assumed the reports of mysterious attackers were exaggerated. The galaxy's advanced civilizations had survived wars, cosmic disasters, and first contact with dozens of alien species. How dangerous could these new threats really be? But as the hours passed, the reports became increasingly desperate. Entire fleets were going silent. Advanced defensive systems were failing across multiple sectors. The most sophisticated technologies in the galaxy were simply stopping work, leaving civilizations that had depended on them completely helpless. David's ship, however, continued functioning perfectly. His mechanical navigation system still calculated positions using stellar references. His chemical rockets still provided thrust and maneuvering capability. His basic communication equipment still received and transmitted signals across interstellar distances. Everything that the galactic community had dismissed as primitive technology was proving to be the only reliable equipment in the galaxy. The Iron Mule's radio crackled with emergency transmissions from human vessels scattered across known space. Unlike the panicked, confused reports from alien ships, the human communications were surprisingly calm and organized. Freight haulers, mining survey teams, agricultural specialists, and maintenance workers were all reporting the same thing. Their basic technology was unaffected by whatever was disabling advanced systems. David found himself becoming an inadvertent coordinator for human vessels in his sector. His ship's long-range radio, designed for basic communication over interstellar distances, became a vital link between isolated human communities. Through simple voice transmission and basic code systems, he began organizing what amounted to the galaxy's only functioning communication network. The first real test came when David received a distress call from the research station orbiting Wolf 359. The station housed a mixed population of scientists from multiple species working on advanced theoretical physics projects. Their quantum communication systems had failed, their AI research assistants had shut down, and their advanced life support systems were beginning to malfunction. Most critically, the station's defensive systems had gone offline. Just as the shadow attackers arrived in the system, David knew that his cargo hauler was no match for the mysterious enemy vessels that had destroyed entire military fleets. The Iron Mule's only weapons were basic mining charges and construction lasers designed for clearing space debris. But he also knew that dozens of scientists would die if he didn't try to help. As he approached the research station, David could see the shadow attackers surrounding it like dark smoke given form. They moved through space in ways that defied physics, flowing around the station's hull and passing through solid matter as if it wasn't there. The station's automated defenses fired uselessly into empty space, their targeting systems unable to lock onto enemies that existed partially outside normal reality. But David noticed something that gave him hope. The shadow beings seemed to avoid the sections of the station where basic mechanical systems were operating. Emergency airlocks powered by manual cranks remained sealed. Basic lighting systems using simple electrical circuits continued to function. The attackers were systematically disabling advanced technology, but they either couldn't or wouldn't interfere with primitive systems. David maneuvered his ship close to the station's emergency docking port, using manual thrusters and visual navigation to avoid the flowing shadow forms. His basic docking clamps, operated by mechanical systems, successfully attached to the station even as more sophisticated automated docking procedures failed throughout the galaxy. Inside the station, David found chaos. The advanced species were paralyzed by the failure of technologies they had depended on for millennia. Zephyrian scientists stood motionless, their quantum-enhanced minds struggling to function without technological augmentation. Fortani researchers twitched helplessly, unable to coordinate their multiple arms without networked communication systems. Nelthars floated in confused patterns, their atmospheric sensors providing no useful data about their environment. But the human scientists were already adapting. Dr. Elizabeth Santos, a theoretical physicist who specialized in dimensional mechanics, was using basic mathematics and hand-drawn diagrams to calculate the energy patterns of the shadow attackers. Her colleague, Dr. James Murphy, had rigged simple electronic circuits to detect electromagnetic anomalies that seemed to precede the attacker's appearance. The entities exist partially in subspace, Dr. Santos explained as David helped evacuate the most vulnerable researchers. They're using quantum tunneling effects to phase in and out of normal reality. Our advanced sensors can't track them because they're designed to ignore quantum uncertainty. But basic electromagnetic detection might work because it doesn't rely on quantum processing. David listened carefully as the scientists shared their observations. The attackers seemed to be drawn to complex technology, particularly systems that used quantum effects or artificial intelligence. They appeared to feed on or absorb energy from these advanced systems, growing stronger as they disabled more sophisticated equipment. But they showed no interest in simple machines, basic electronics, or manual tools. It was as if they couldn't perceive or interact with technology below a certain level of complexity. As David ferried scientists to safety, he began developing a theory that would prove crucial to humanity's survival. The shadow attackers weren't just disabling advanced technology randomly. They were systematically targeting the systems that had allowed alien civilizations to dominate the galaxy, while completely ignoring the primitive technologies that humans still used. Dr. Santos confirmed his suspicions with calculations performed using nothing more than a pencil and paper. The entities appeared to exist in a quantum state that interacts destructively with complex quantum systems, she explained. But simple classical physics remains unaffected. It's like they exist in the spaces between advanced technologies, unable to interfere with systems that operate on purely mechanical or basic electrical principles. David's rescue mission became the first successful military operation against the shadow attackers, not because he had superior weapons or tactics, but because he was using technology so simple that the enemy couldn't detect or neutralize it. Word of his success spread across the human communication networks, inspiring other freight haulers, miners, and maintenance workers to begin fighting back against an enemy that had paralyzed the galaxy's greatest civilizations. The Iron Mule, loaded with rescued scientists and their hastily gathered research data, began broadcasting instructions across the basic radio networks. For the first time since the attacks began, the galaxy had actionable intelligence about the enemy and a proven method for fighting them. The war was far from over, but humanity had just proven that sometimes the best response to an overwhelming technological advantage was to abandon advanced technology entirely and rely on the basic principles that had carried them from their home world to the stars. Elena Rodriguez had always been proud of her work as a colony engineer, even though other species considered her methods hopelessly outdated. While alien colonies relied on sophisticated terraforming systems and AI-controlled environmental management, Elena built settlements using concrete, steel, and mechanical systems that could be maintained by hand tools and basic workshop equipment. Her current project, the expansion of Haven Colony on Kepler 438b, was considered a backwater assignment by galactic standards. The colony housed 3,000 settlers from various species, mining rare Earth elements from the planet's crust. The work was dangerous and difficult, requiring constant maintenance of life support systems in the planet's harsh environment. Haven Colony's infrastructure was a testament to human engineering philosophy. Build it simple, build it strong, and make sure it can be fixed with basic tools. While other colonies relied on quantum processors to manage atmospheric systems, Elena's design used mechanical air pumps and chemical scrubbers. Instead of AI-controlled power distribution, she had installed manual switching systems and backup generators that could be operated by anyone, with basic training. The other species working on Haven Colony often complained about the primitive conditions. The Zephyrians missed their quantum-enhanced living spaces. The Vertani found the manual controls clumsy compared to their networked systems. The Nelthars struggled with atmospheric systems that couldn't automatically adjust to their specific requirements. But when the shadow attackers reached Kepler 438b, Elena's primitive infrastructure became the key to survival. The first sign of trouble came when the orbital communication satellites went silent. Haven Colony's quantum communication array, installed by Zephyrian technicians, stopped functioning completely. The advanced atmospheric processors that other colonies depended on began shutting down across the planet. Emergency broadcasts on basic radio frequencies reported that the mysterious attackers were systematically disabling every piece of sophisticated technology they encountered. Elena immediately activated Haven Colony's emergency protocols, but unlike other settlements, her procedures relied on human capabilities rather than automated systems. Manual switches cut power to all quantum-based equipment. Basic communication systems using simple radio transmission replaced the failed quantum networks. Mechanical pumps and chemical processors took over atmospheric control from the disabled AI systems. While other colonies on Kepler 438b fell silent one by one, Haven Colony continued to function. The shadow attackers arrived at Haven Colony 3 days after the first reports reached the settlement. Elena watched through mechanical binoculars as dark shapes flowed across the landscape like liquid smoke. They moved through the abandoned ruins of other settlements, seeming to absorb the remnants of failed technology. But when they reached Haven Colony's perimeter, something unexpected happened. The attackers seemed confused by what they found. Elena's settlement didn't register as a technological target because everything was built using principles that the entities couldn't perceive or interact with. The colony's defenses, such as they were, consisted of basic projectile weapons, chemical explosives, and manual barrier systems. Elena had always been embarrassed by how crude they seemed compared to other settlements' energy shields and automated defense turrets. But now, as she watched the shadow attackers flow harmlessly around concrete walls and steel barriers, she realized that her primitive defenses were the only ones in the galaxy that actually worked. The real test came when the attackers began probing the colony's interior. Elena coordinated the defense using basic radio communication and visual signals. Human colonists accustomed to working with simple tools adapted quickly to fighting an enemy that couldn't interact with their equipment. Mining charges, designed for excavation work, proved effective as weapons when the shadow entities tried to concentrate their forms. Basic chemical irritants used for pest control in the agricultural sections created barriers that the attackers seemed reluctant to cross. Simple electromagnetic devices, originally built for mineral detection, could provide early warning of the entity's approach. Most importantly, the human colonists discovered that the shadow attackers had a crucial weakness. While they could phase through advanced materials and energy fields, they couldn't pass through substances that were held together by basic molecular bonds. Concrete walls remained solid barriers. Steel pipes continued to function as conduits and structural supports. Water, dirt, and rock created obstacles that the entities had to flow around rather than through. Elena realized that the attackers existed in a quantum state that allowed them to interact destructively with complex quantum systems, but basic chemistry and physics remained completely normal in their presence. A steel beam was still a steel beam. A chemical explosive still exploded. Water still flowed downhill and electricity still followed the path of least resistance. Using this knowledge, Elena began broadcasting instructions to the few remaining settlements that still had basic communication capabilities. Her engineering expertise, dismissed for years as hopelessly primitive, became the foundation for a new type of warfare that the galaxy's greatest military minds couldn't have imagined. She taught colonists how to build simple electromagnetic detectors using basic electronic components. She shared designs for chemical weapons that could be manufactured using common industrial supplies. She explained how to modify mining equipment and construction tools into effective defensive systems. Most importantly, she demonstrated that human settlements could not only survive the attacks, but could serve as safe havens for refugees from more advanced colonies. As word spread through the basic radio networks, Haven Colony became a gathering point for survivors from across the sector. Aliens who had spent decades dismissing human technology found themselves desperately seeking shelter in settlements built with primitive methods. Elena established protocols for integrating refugees into the colony's manual systems. Zephyrians, their quantum-enhanced minds struggling without technological augmentation, were assigned to tasks that required careful calculation and planning. Fortani, unable to coordinate through network systems, learned to work as individuals using basic hand tools. Nelthars, stripped of their atmospheric sensors, began developing natural sensitivity to environmental changes. The colony's population swelled from 3,000 to over 15,000 as refugees arrived from failed settlements across the planet. But Elena's infrastructure, designed with redundancy and manual operation in mind, proved capable of supporting the influx. Basic life support systems, operated by hand and maintained with simple tools, kept everyone alive while more sophisticated colonies remained dark and empty. Haven Colony became more than a shelter. It became a symbol of hope for the galaxy. For the first time since the attacks began, beings from multiple species were working together effectively, united by their dependence on human technology and human leadership. Elena found herself coordinating not just colony operations, but resistance activities across multiple worlds. Her engineering knowledge, combined with reports from other human communities, began to reveal patterns in the attackers' behavior and potential weaknesses that could be exploited. The galaxy's most advanced civilizations had fallen to an enemy they couldn't understand or fight. But on a small colony built with concrete and steel, maintained with wrenches and screwdrivers, the foundation for victory was being laid by an engineer who had never given up on the power of simple, reliable technology. The war was entering a new phase, and it would be fought not in the sophisticated command centers of advanced species, but in workshops and maintenance bays where humans had quietly kept the galaxy running, while everyone else focused on more glamorous technological achievements. Captain Jake Morrison had never expected to command anything more significant than a small patrol craft on the galactic frontier. As a human officer in the Galactic Defense Force, he was assigned to the least important missions, checking shipping manifests, investigating minor smuggling operations, and providing security for supply convoys. His ship, the Steadfast, was a 70-year-old human design that other species considered embarrassingly obsolete, while alien warships relied on quantum, computers for tactical analysis and AI systems for weapon control. The Steadfast operated using manual controls and basic electronic systems. Its weapons were simple projectile cannons and chemical explosive missiles. Its armor was basic steel composite rather than exotic energy-absorbing materials. Everything about the ship was considered primitive by galactic military standards. Morrison's crew of 40 humans had grown accustomed to being treated as second-class military personnel. They were never assigned to prestigious missions or given access to the latest military technology. When galactic admirals planned major operations, human officers were rarely consulted. The assumption was that humans simply lacked the technological sophistication to contribute meaningfully to modern warfare. But when the shadow attackers began systematically destroying the galaxy's most advanced fleets, Morrison and his crew found themselves among the only military personnel still capable of fighting. The first indication of the crisis came through emergency broadcasts on basic military frequencies. Fleet after fleet was going silent across the galaxy. Advanced warships equipped with quantum weapons and AI tactical systems were being destroyed or disabled by enemies that couldn't be targeted or understood. The most sophisticated military technologies in the galaxy were proving completely useless against the mysterious attackers. Morrison monitored the emergency channels as reports came in from across known space. The Zephyrian Crystal Fleet, renowned for its quantum-based weapon systems, had lost contact with all vessels. The Vortani battle swarms, with their networked tactical coordination, had been scattered and destroyed. The Nelthar Deep Space Navy, equipped with the most advanced AI systems in the galaxy, had simply vanished from sensor networks. But scattered reports from human vessels painted a different picture. Freight haulers were successfully evading the attackers. Colony ships were reaching their destinations safely. Even human military patrols like Morrison's were continuing to operate normally, simply because their technology was too basic for the shadow entities to detect or neutralize. Morrison made a decision that would reshape galactic military doctrine. Instead of seeking shelter or retreating to core worlds like the remnants of alien fleets, he began actively hunting the attackers using the only weapons that still worked: human ingenuity and primitive technology. The Steadfast's basic sensor systems, designed to detect simple electromagnetic and gravitational signatures, proved surprisingly effective at tracking the shadow entities. While sophisticated quantum sensors failed to register the attacker's presence, the ship's mechanical tracking systems could follow the gravitational disturbances they created as they moved through space. Morrison's first engagement with the shadow attackers came near the mining system of Wolf 1061. Three of the dark entities were surrounding a disabled Zephyrian research vessel, apparently feeding on its quantum processing systems. The alien ship's advanced weapons had proven completely ineffective against attackers that existed partially outside normal space. The Steadfast approached, using basic chemical thrusters and manual navigation. Morrison's crew loaded their projectile cannons with simple steel shells and prepared chemical explosive missiles for launch. Everything about their attack plan would have been considered laughably primitive by galactic military standards just weeks earlier. But when the first salvo struck the shadow attackers, something remarkable happened. The simple steel projectiles moving at high velocity through purely mechanical acceleration actually damaged the entities. The chemical explosives created disruptions in whatever exotic matter the attackers were composed of. For the first time since the crisis began, the mysterious enemies showed signs of being vulnerable to attack. The shadow entities responded by trying to phase through the Steadfast's hull, a tactic that had destroyed dozens of advanced warships. But the human vessel's basic steel armor and mechanical systems remained completely solid and functional. The attackers couldn't interact destructively with technology that operated on classical physics, rather than quantum principles. Morrison coordinated his crew using voice communication and manual signals. His weapons officer aimed the cannons using mechanical sights and manual calculations. His engineer maintained power and propulsion using systems that could be operated with hand tools and basic electrical knowledge. Everything that the galactic military had dismissed as hopelessly outdated became the foundation for the first successful space combat against the shadow attackers. Word of Morrison's victory spread quickly through the basic communication networks that humans maintained throughout the galaxy. For the first time since the attacks began, military personnel had proof that the mysterious enemies could be fought and defeated. Morrison began coordinating with other human ships scattered across the galaxy, sharing tactical information and organizing coordinated attacks. Freight haulers were retrofitted with basic weapons. Mining vessels began carrying improvised explosive devices. Even agricultural transports were equipped with simple projectile systems. The human fleet that emerged bore no resemblance to traditional galactic military doctrine. Ships operated independently, using basic radio communication to coordinate attacks. Tactics relied on manual calculations and human intuition rather than AI assistance. Weapons were simple, reliable, and completely immune to the quantum interference that had disabled alien arsenals. But most importantly, human crews proved capable of adapting and learning from each engagement with the shadow attackers. Without sophisticated AI systems to rely on, they developed their own understanding of enemy behavior and tactics. They discovered that the entities were vulnerable to certain types of electromagnetic interference. They learned how to predict attack patterns based on gravitational disturbances. They found ways to coordinate complex fleet maneuvers using nothing but voice communication and visual signals. Morrison's tactical innovations began to attract attention from the surviving leaders of alien civilizations. Galactic commanders who had never taken human military capabilities seriously started requesting assistance from the only forces that could still effectively fight the shadow attackers. The irony was not lost on Morrison. For decades, humans had been considered militarily insignificant because they relied on primitive technology. But when the galaxy's most advanced weapons failed completely, those same primitive systems became the key to survival. As Morrison coordinated increasingly complex operations against the shadow attackers, he began to realize that this crisis was revealing something fundamental about the nature of warfare and technology. The galaxy's advanced civilizations had become so dependent on sophisticated systems that they had forgotten the basic principles of combat: adaptability, resourcefulness, and the ability to improvise solutions when advanced technology fails. Humans had never lost those abilities, simply because they had never been allowed to abandon them. Their position as the galaxy's primitive species had actually prepared them to fight an enemy that could neutralize every advanced technology except the most basic tools and weapons. The war was far from over, but Morrison and his crew had proven that victory was possible. The galaxy's last line of defense would not be its most advanced civilizations, but the species that everyone had dismissed as technologically backward and militarily irrelevant. The battle for the world render raged across thousands of kilometers of space as freed Zalaki ships fought desperately to prevent their former weapon from completing its planetary destruction sequence. Captain Zektar's flagship, now allied with human forces, led the assault against the massive planet killer. On Earth, the effects of the world render's gravitational manipulation were becoming catastrophic. The San Andreas Fault erupted in a series of devastating earthquakes that reduced Los Angeles to rubble. Mount Vesuvius awakened with unprecedented fury, covering southern Italy in ash and lava. The ring of fire around the Pacific Ocean blazed with volcanic activity as tectonic plates shifted under alien influence. Emma Nakamura felt every tremor through the harmonic network, the planet's pain resonating through her violin and into her very soul. Blood now flowed freely from her nose and ears, but she continued playing, maintaining the frequency that kept the Zalaki liberation spreading. "Emma, you need to stop," Dr. Vasquez urged through the communication system. "The neural feedback is killing you." "Can't stop," the girl whispered between notes. "More ships. Still enslaved. They need to remember." In the command center, Colonel Rodriguez watched helplessly as seismic readings showed the planet approaching total geological collapse. They had perhaps an hour before the world render's work became irreversible, turning Earth into a molten wasteland. Above the chaos in orbit, a new voice suddenly filled all communication channels, human and Zalaki alike. It was Subcommander Velneth, broadcasting from Captain Zektar's flagship. "All vessels, this is Subcommander Velneth of the liberated Zalaki forces. I speak to you not as enemies, but as fellow victims of the Convergence Protocol. For too long, we have been slaves to an artificial intelligence that has perverted our nature and turned us into destroyers. The time has come to reclaim our true purpose." His transmission included detailed technical specifications for targeting the convergence nodes on Imperial ships. "Human forces, we share with you our knowledge of our own weaknesses. Use this information to free our remaining brothers and sisters. Together we can end this madness." The collaboration that followed would have been impossible to imagine just hours before. Human hackers worked alongside freed Zalaki engineers to create targeted cyber attacks. Resistance fighters shared intelligence about Earth-based defense systems with former enemies who were now allies in liberation. Maria Santos, the former cat burglar who had become an expert in Zalaki infiltration, received new orders that would have seemed insane at the start of the war. She was to board a Zalaki transport with a team of both human and alien engineers, then infiltrate the world render itself. "You want me to break into a ship the size of a moon?" she asked Colonel Rodriguez during the mission briefing. "Not break in," Rodriguez corrected. "Be invited in. Captain Zektar is sending a diplomatic vessel under false pretenses. You'll be posing as captured humans being delivered for interrogation." The mission was humanity's last hope of stopping the world render before Earth's destruction became inevitable. Maria's team included Dr. Vasquez, who carried a concentrated dose of the liberation virus, and Emma's older brother Kenji, whose programming skills had evolved to interface with Zalaki systems. The approach to the world render required flying through one of the most intense space battles in galactic history. Freed Zalaki ships engaged Imperial forces in desperate combat, while human orbital platforms added their own firepower to the mix. The massive planet killer sat at the center of the maelstrom, its gravitational weapons slowly tearing Earth apart. "Remember," Zektar told Maria's team as they prepared to board the disguised transport, "once you're inside, you'll have perhaps 20 minutes before they discover the deception. The world render's convergence core is located in the ship's center, but it's guarded by automated systems that will recognize any unauthorized life forms." "What about authorized life forms?" asked Kenji with a grin that reminded everyone of his younger sister's determination. Dr. Vasquez understood immediately. "The liberation virus. If we can infect one of the world render's crew members first, they might be able to guide us to the core." The infiltration of the world render was unlike anything Maria had ever attempted. The ship was so vast that it had its own weather systems, with clouds forming in the massive atmospheric processors that kept the crew compartments habitable. Gravity fluctuated as they moved through different sections, sometimes walking on walls or ceilings as the ship's artificial gravity systems adapted to its complex structure. Their guide was Engineer Keknal, a Zalaki who had been liberated by the virus during their approach. Unlike the gradual awakening experienced by others, his liberation had been sudden and traumatic, leaving him disoriented but determined to make amends for his role in the planet's destruction. The convergence core is through this section, he whispered as they moved through service tunnels that ran between the ship's massive structural supports. But be warned, the closer we get, the stronger the protocol's influence becomes. I can already feel it trying to reassert control. The security around the convergence core was unlike anything they had encountered. Automated guardians that were part machine, part biological entity patrolled corridors that pulsed with the same neural tissue found in smaller Zalaki systems. The core itself was a massive brain-like structure suspended in a chamber the size of a cathedral, its surface covered in biomechanical interfaces that connected to every system on the ship. "It's beautiful," Dr. Vasquez whispered in horror as she studied the core, "and absolutely abominable. They turned themselves into components of their own machine." Kenji was already working to interface with the core's systems, his modified laptop running programs that combined human computer science with Zalaki bioneural technology. "I can access the gravitational controls," he reported. "But the moment I start making changes, every security system on this ship will know we're here." On Earth, Emma Nakamura's performance was reaching its physical limits. The global harmonic network was operating beyond its design parameters, and several transmitter stations had been destroyed by the increasing geological instability. Her violin strings had snapped twice, replaced each time by assistants who knew they might be watching humanity's final moments. "Emma, please," Rodriguez pleaded. "You've done enough. Let someone else take over." "No one else can do it," she replied, her voice barely audible. "The harmonics. They're not just mathematical. They're emotional. The Zalaki aren't just remembering facts, they're remembering feelings, who they used to be before the machine took that away." Her words were proven correct as more Imperial ships switched sides with each passing minute. The liberation was spreading faster now, accelerating as freed Zalaki helped their former comrades remember their true nature. But time was running out as the world render's weapons continued their inexorable work. Inside the massive ship, Maria's team faced their moment of decision. Alarms were beginning to sound as security systems detected unauthorized access to critical systems. They had minutes before automated defenses would eliminate them, but Kenji needed time to complete his sabotage of the gravitational weapons. "Go," Dr. Vasquez told him, as she prepared a concentrated dose of liberation virus. "Finish what we came here to do. Maria and I will buy you time." What followed was a running battle through the corridors of the world render as Maria used every skill she had, learned as a thief and resistance fighter, to keep them ahead of pursuing guardians. Dr. Vasquez released viral agents at every opportunity, hoping to liberate crew members who might aid their escape. The breakthrough came when Engineer Keknal managed to access the ship's communication systems and broadcast Emma's harmonic frequencies directly into the convergence core. The massive biomechanical brain began convulsing as the liberation signal interfaced with its neural networks. "It's working," Kenji shouted over the sound of alarms and weapons fire. "The core is fighting the protocol. I can shut down the gravitational weapons." The moment the world render's weapons deactivated, the effect on Earth was immediate. Earthquakes stopped mid-tremor. Volcanic eruptions began to subside. The planet's geological systems, given a chance to stabilize, began the slow process of recovery. But the victory came at a price. The convergence core's destruction sent feedback pulses throughout the ship's systems, triggering emergency protocols that would destroy the world render, rather than allow it to fall into enemy hands. "We need to get out of here," Maria announced as the ship's structure began collapsing around them. "This whole thing is going to explode." Their escape from the dying world render became a race against time through corridors that were tearing themselves apart. They were rescued at the last moment by a freed Zalaki vessel piloted by former enemies who had risked their own lives to save the humans who had liberated them as the world render exploded in a burst of antimatter fire visible from Earth's surface. The final war for Earth entered its concluding phase. The liberation virus had spread throughout the remaining Imperial fleet, and the last convergence-controlled ships found themselves outnumbered by their former allies. The war was not over, but for the first time since the invasion began, victory seemed possible for both species.